the resurrection of Squire Tuckfield. The town of Crediton had always been a place of quiet traditions, where old families had lived and died for generations. But in the year 1752, a most peculiar and unsettling event took place, one that would be whispered about in taverns and drawing rooms for centuries to come. It all began with the death of Squire Reginald Tuckfield. The squire had been a man of wealth and excess, known for his fondness for brandy, his love of card games, and his booming, mischievous laugh that often echoed through the halls of his grand estate. Some called him a scoundrel, others called him a legend, but no one expected him to rise from the dead. Squire Tuckfield had died, or so the town believed, in his sleep. His servants found him cold and still, his breath long gone, his body lifeless. It was said that the night before his death, he had been drinking heavily, laughing over a hand of cards, and boasting about how even death himself couldn't best him. His last recorded words had been spoken with a wicked grin. "If the devil comes for me, I'll challenge him to a game of cards. And if I lose, well, I'll just demand a brandy before I go." The irony was not lost on the town when, the very next morning, he was found stone dead. His burial was arranged quickly. The townsfolk, while mournful, were eager to lay the infamous squire to rest. And so, under the cold grey sky of a November afternoon, they buried him. But the squire had other plans. The burial party, a group of 6 men, including Tuckfield's closest drinking companions, had just finished lowering the coffin into the earth. The priest murmured the final words of the ceremony. The gravedigger lifted his shovel to begin covering the casket with soil. And then a noise, a sudden, sharp knocking from within the coffin. The men froze, their breath catching in their throats. Then a voice, muffled yet unmistakable. "Gentlemen, this is all very touching, but I believe there's been a mistake." Silence. The priest turned pale. The gravedigger dropped his shovel. One of the burial men screamed and ran. The coffin lid shook, rattling as if the man inside were demanding to be let out. Then came the voice again, louder this time. "I say, open this damn thing, I could use a drink." The remaining men, trembling with shock and disbelief, hesitated before finally wrenching the lid open. And there, inside the coffin, Squire Tuckfield sat up, dusting himself off and blinking against the fading daylight. "Ah," he said, stretching his arms. "I thought I might have overslept. Now where's my brandy?" The burial party, still reeling from the sight of their very much alive friend, stumbled backward in horror. One man crossed himself, whispering a prayer. Another fainted on the spot. But Tuckfield merely chuckled. "You all look as though you've seen a ghost," he bellowed. "But don't worry, lads. I assure you, I'm quite myself." His grin widened. "Unless, of course, this is hell, and you poor souls were dragged down with me. But if that's the case, well, at least they serve good brandy here." The stunned men could hardly refuse him. Shaking, still unsure whether they were dealing with a miracle or a curse, they carried the squire back to the nearest tavern. There, in the dim candlelight of the Black Hart Inn, the resurrected squire ordered a full bottle of brandy, declaring, "If I have indeed cheated death, then I must celebrate." And so he did. Glasses were poured, hands trembled, and not a soul dared question what had happened. "A toast!" Tuckfield roared. The men raised their glasses. "To second chances!" The brandy burned warm in their throats, and for a moment the fear of the graveyard melted away. As the night wore on and the brandy flowed freely, the shock of the event turned to amusement. The men, still half convinced that Tuckfield might crumble to dust at any moment, dared to ask, "Squire, how did you come back?" Tuckfield only grinned, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "Let's just say, Death and I had a disagreement." "What sort of disagreement?" one of them asked hesitantly. Tuckfield leaned in, lowering his voice. "We played a game of cards." A chill ran through the room. The men exchanged nervous glances. "You played cards? With death?" Tuckfield took a slow sip of his brandy, savouring the taste before answering. "I did, and I won." Silence. The fire in the hearth crackled. Someone coughed uncomfortably. Then Tuckfield laughed. "Or maybe he let me win. Either way, here I am." The men did not press the matter further. Some things, after all, were best left unquestioned. Squire Tuckfield lived for another year after that fateful night, and though he carried on with his usual drinking, gambling and mischief, there was a strange change in him. Some nights he would sit alone in the tavern, staring at an empty chair across from him, as if expecting someone to join him for a game of cards. On stormy evenings, passers-by swore they saw a dark figure standing outside his window watching. And then, 1 year to the day after he had been buried alive, he vanished. His servants found his room empty, his bed untouched, his brandy glass half full on the table. Only one thing was left behind, a single playing card resting on his pillow. The ace of spades, the card of death. To this day, in Crediton, the tale of Squire Tuckfield's resurrection is still told. Some say he truly cheated death, outwitting the Grim Reaper himself in a game of wits. Others believe he was given 1 year to settle his affairs before death finally came to claim him for good. And a few whisper that, on certain moonlit nights, if you sit in the old tavern and pour yourself a glass of brandy, you might just hear the sound of cards shuffling in the shadows. And if you do not play. For this time you might not be so lucky. Many thanks for treading this haunted tale's dark path. If its chill gripped you, like, follow, subscribe, and murmur your secrets below. Care to summon more? The coffee link below beckons. Heed its call.